From fabulous Las Vegas, Nevada, this is Pod Therapy. Real people, real problems, and real therapists. You can submit your questions anonymously at podtherapy.net or email us at podtherapyguys@gmail.com. In this episode, we have intentionally put in 2 mistakes. See if you can catch them. And now, broadcasting from the Churn, that guy is Dr. Jim Job, and I'm Nick Tangent. It's time for some Pod Therapy.
Well, top of the morning to you. We've got somebody.
What accent do you think you're doing?
Is that not Australian?
No.
No, they don't say that?
Even.
I don't know what that. I think that was just. You're having a stroke.
That might have been it. Wait, the top of the morning thing's not Australian?
No, that's
What is
Irish.
That? Oh. Well, good day. Is that the right one?
Closer.
Am I getting there? All right.
I mean, it's not going to get good. It's just going to get closer.
Let's just move on.
I'm just going to bludgeon it all. Good day,
No, that's
everybody.
Irish.
I'm just going to keep saying good day because that's 100% of what I've got. We have a special guest with us today, our pen pal from across the planet. We've got, okay, here I'm going to nail it, Dr. Mike Todorovic.
I think you got it.
I feel like it's close enough.
I think you didn't.
Nobody cares what you think, Mike. Hang up. He's bigger than me. Hang up quick. So we've got Dr. Mike. That's easier to say. And
Yeah.
Dr. Mike is our pen pal. He runs 2 awesome programs at least online. He's one half of Dr. Matt and Dr. Mike's medical podcast, as creatively named as Pod Therapy is. And he's also one half of Dr. Matt and Dr. Mike's YouTube channel, which I think that one's just called Dr. Matt and Dr. Mike.
Yep.
No points for
Again,
creativity, buddy.
Very
But
inventive.
professionally, a little bit about Mike. So Dr. Mike, he's a senior lecturer of anatomy and physiology and an active researcher at Griffith University in Queensland, Australia, which I've learned today is a place. He has a PhD in the field of clinical neuroscience, and his research interests focus on educating the public and healthcare professionals regarding pain and dementia. Dr. Mike, all the way from Australia, flew in today, and boy, are your arms tired. Hey, Mike.
Hey, guys. Thank you so much for having me.
That was a fine intro up to a point.
I was crushing it.
Yeah, right up until the arms tired bit.
Well, I think I let off strong with the whole getting the wrong accent. So where'd you say that accent was really from? The top of the morning thing? What do they say?
No,
Irish.
what you said wasn't anywhere.
Top of the morning to you.
You just sound like you're having a stroke. That's all. I'm concerned for you.
Hands off me Lucky Charms, bloke.
Bloke.
It's all the same.
It does sound like you're
It's
having
all
a
the same.
vascular event, unfortunately.
Yes. Luckily, we have a doctor on the line who can diagnose you.
Quick, show us how to do CPR. So, Dr. Mike, tell us about your 2 shows, your podcast, and the big picture of what your program is.
Yeah, so myself and a colleague, Dr. Matt, we have both a podcast and a YouTube channel where we teach the public and aspiring healthcare professionals, nurses, doctors, physios, whoever it may be, about how the body works. So our YouTube channel has around about 300, I think we're hitting 300,000 subscribers and over 20 million views. And our podcast is a top 5 medical podcast in a number of different countries. And again, we just talk about different structures of the body, different functions of the body, different organ systems, and hopefully, seemingly, do it in a way that people understand and enjoy.
So, I assume that Australian medical education is superior to American education generally.
I'm surprised you haven't asked yet about student loans in Australia.
Oh, that's coming. Yeah, no, there's going to be some talk about that. Also, their healthcare system's got to be fundamentally different too. But here in America, our med school begins with a song. The head bone's connected to the neck bone, and the neck bone's connected to the shoulder bone. So that's mostly what your show is, right? You're just kind of singing that song, but then in different, keys and in different parts.
Yeah.
So
Yes.
before we
Yeah,
got started,
absolutely.
I asked you if you're ready for the dumbest questions that you've ever had to face. This is what I'm talking about.
Just
It's,
accurately
look,
describing what would be an entertaining program.
I think our medical education is pretty good, I would say.
Okay.
I can't speak for
As
that
good as
of
our
the US.
song, or
Well, I mean, the song is definitely part of the final exam, sure, but it's just in a different
all these
accent.
students are humming and tapping their feet as they're.
That's right.
How do you pronounce shoulder bone? Well, cool, man. Well, we are excited to have you. So for those of you who follow us on social media, you have seen our love affair with Dr. Matt and Dr. Mike kind of live over the past months. And it's funny because we had known about their podcast and just knew about them in the ether. And then one day I was jealously watching Jacob's podcast, Matt Mattingly's Ice Cream Social, do a crossover episode with Great Night. And that's Brushwood and Justin Robert Young. And they were just crushing it. And I was like, man, why don't we have like a twin sister podcast or like a friend podcast that's swimming in our world that does like healthcare stuff, entertainingly. And then out of the Twitter ether, Mike rose up and he was like, I'll be your friend. And
Absolutely.
that is a dangerous phrase to say to Joe.
And that was the beginning of the end. For both of our
So
podcasts.
they've been kind of our love partners ever since, and we're always crushing on them on Twitter and trying to show people what they're up to. But man, you guys, if you have not ever checked out Dr. Matt and Dr. Mike, it is great stuff. It is really deep, accurate stuff.
I don't watch
entertaining
much
and interesting.
YouTube. I really don't. I watch very little YouTube. I've watched Dr. Matt and Dr. Mike, and it's a good show. It's just it's an entertaining show that boy does the information. But you are not doing that show for me, and that is an interesting show.
It comes quick and fast. Yeah, it comes quick and fast, and it is directed primarily at students or people aspiring to be in the healthcare field in one way or another. So it is for a particular population, I suppose, but there is something there for everyone. I go through some topics in a way that I think everybody could understand, but there are some quite heavy ones, that's for sure.
And on that note, I do have to say, I mean, because I don't obviously have any kind of medical background and I'm not training to be working in that field, but one episode that I shared a lot was the one on vaccines.
Mm-hmm. Oh, cool.
That was a great episode, and it was done in a way that, like, so many things that I thought I had a pretty good understanding of vaccines, but the way that it was broken down was like, oh yeah, I never really thought about that, and it was really insightful.
Thank you. It's we thought it was timely and required, and so many people talking about vaccines and the pros and cons and all that type of stuff. And I think a lot of people misinformed or not even informed at all, in all honesty, with a lot of the things that they're saying. And so we thought, look, let's just break all vaccines down. We don't have to even focus. I don't even think we did focus very much on COVID per se. I think we just spoke about the history of vaccines and then built it up to today and spoke about the different kinds. And we even got contacted by YouTube in Australia to do videos on the COVID-19 vaccines to try and bust myths and promote the public to take the vaccines. And so we did those videos, and they got viewed quite well, but we also got absolutely destroyed in the comment section by trolls.
Do people have strong opinions about that?
Yeah, I didn't realize until people said I was going to be tried for murder. And I was,
and you said, but despite that,
and I had people saying, you're going to be part of Nuremberg Trials 2.0. Obviously, they don't really know what they're talking about, but there's
or what the original Nuremberg Trials were.
Exactly, and so we had a lot of that stuff, and so that was horrid because I think people who appreciate and understand, they go, yep, that makes sense, and I agree, and they move on. But then people who disagree, they go, I don't like this, and I'm going to vocalize that. And so you tend to get this biased response where it's just all hatred. And it was fine because I know what YouTube comments are like, but we had to disable those comments. And then they jump on other videos and say, how dare you disable comments? You are
then they're jumping on your vitamin B video and like, you Nazis. Like, no what do you guys have against vitamin B?
That's right. So yeah, it's a double-edged sword. We have to talk about vaccines in what we do. We have to talk about the evidence associated with it. And even though we know we're going to get lashback, you got to do it. It's part of our job. We're health communicators. If we can equip people with the knowledge to make better health decisions, then we've done our job. But if we're avoiding it because we're too scared about getting a little bit of abuse from an anonymous 14-year-old troll, then I don't think we should continue doing any of the stuff that we do.
Well, I consider myself a semi-professional Twitter troll. So, I take it seriously.
We've always been kind to us.
Yeah. It's literary criticism.
Jim does have all the style and pizzazz of a 14-year-old troll.
Thank you.
So,
Thank you.
I guess kind of a follow-up, and I know that this isn't on our agenda of questions, but now I'm really interested. As a science educator and a health educator, has the last 2 or 3 years been exceptionally frustrating for you, or is this just you're just kind of used to this now?
Exceptionally frustrating. I'll have mates who know what I do, and know that I do it quite well. And so let me give you an example. I've got a mate who's a mechanic, and he's a brilliant mechanic. I send my car to him to fix my car and do my services. And he say to me, I'm not going to get the vaccine for X, Y, and Z reason. And I'll say, okay, well, I'll take each of those points and I'll dismantle it and I'll provide the evidence and I'll do it in a way that I believe is quite kind and not disparaging or belittling or anything like that. And then he'll still go, no.
But still.
I think you're wrong. And, and I'll say to him, I'll go, look, you know what I do for a living, right? I don't remember you bringing up the problem of antibiotics and the fact that 1 in 1,000 people will have an anaphylactic reaction from antibiotics. Yet 1 in 1,000,000 people are having a similar reaction with vaccines, but you're not up in arms about antibiotics for some reason. And, what would you do if I turned up to your mechanic shop tomorrow and said, hey, the way you're fixing that car is wrong. The way you've been doing that is incorrect. I said, you'll just dismiss me. You would just wave your hand and say, piss off. You have no idea what you're talking about. And I said, and that is how I feel right now.
By the way. At best, he would just dismiss you.
Yes.
The nicest reaction is dismissal.
You might eat a wrench.
Right.
Yeah.
And and so what that highlights to me is that it is, for many people, it is not a discussion based in evidence. It is a discussion based in emotion and politics. And so as soon as that happens, I think my job as a health educator is over. Unless I dedicate the time to change their mind emotionally, have the conversation about why are they so attached to this stance from an emotional standpoint or a political standpoint. Who are you actually fighting against? Because you're not fighting against who you think you're fighting against. That's beyond my level of expertise and sort of delves into your area. And so I can't really do anything. So I'll say to these friends of mine, I'll just go, look, I don't know what I can say. I've given you the evidence. You know what I do for a living. And if you're still going to dismiss it, I don't think there's any more we can do. There's no more conversation that we can have that I think is going to be conducive. So that's probably the most difficult and frustrating part of the pandemic has been that realm, because no one else he will come to me for advice on everything else medical related. He'll ask me and he'll go, oh cool, thank you for that, but this and
when he says what's this rash, he listens to you.
Well, Mike, on top of your background in medical education, one of the things that we were super excited to chat about is your background in clinical neuroscience, and you've done a lot of research in that and a lot of thinking. And as we were kind of getting together and saying, man, it'd be great to get Mike on here, there's so many areas of crossover. One of the areas that I got really interested in is your background work in the physiology of pain. And I think that's fascinating because, and this is something I was sharing with you in our email exchanges. So Nick and I, obviously, therapists with lots of backgrounds. We've worked in addictions. We've worked in general mental health. And so, especially in America, I don't know how bad the problem is in Australia, the opioid epidemic has just been overwhelming here as a major cause of death. But then also, Nick and I used to work in a substance abuse rehab that actually specialized in treating patients who had chronic pain and had really only become addicted to painkillers just trying to treat this unique ailment. And so we got a lot of firsthand experience working with that. And even today on outpatient levels and in rehabs, we just see a lot of people dealing with what I consider to be both a physical and psychological phenomenon of pain. It is this very powerful thing that is crossing through all the planes, and it's emotional and it's mental and it's physical and it's all these things. It's social. It defines so much of your life. And you have such a deep background in this that we thought this would be a great place to just kind of do some intersection. But I want to start by asking kind of what got you interested theoretically in the study of the physiology of pain?
It's crazy complex, and it is when you look at science, often a lot of the things that we do are as objective as possible, and pain by definition is subjective, and so that means a lot of science decides to sort of look away, because how can you measure something that is by definition subjective? How can you at least objectively measure it? And so I thought that in itself was interesting. We know that we experience pain. We know that we can stimulate pain through certain noxious stimuli, whether it be mechanical or chemical or thermal. And we can experience that pain, but we know that it's not a one-to-one ratio between some sort of noxious stimuli and the painful experience we have. And so I found that interesting. So I decided to start doing my work in pain and the pain pathway and ways to modulate pain and just have a look at everything from top to toe and toe to top when it comes to pain. So I think it's amazing, it's interesting, it's complex, and every single person experiences it.
That was a very elaborate way of saying you wanted to get public funding to build a pain dungeon, but I like how you did it. Yeah, you could have just said, short answer, I'm a sadist, I'm into it, figured I could two bird, one stone this thing.
Well, what the listeners can't see is his background.
Yeah. That's right. They don't see the stretcher.
That's right.
And the long mustache that he's twirling.
That's right. It's very, he's got that riding
door.
crop he keeps slapping into his hand. His menacing, villainous. So the study of pain, as you were just saying, it is one of the most subjective things ever. And I think so many people get so frustrated with that because they try to explain, this is what I'm experiencing, this is what's going on. And when you think even of medical science, sometimes it's so frustrating how we talk about pain. I don't know how it is in Australia. In America, you go to an ER, we literally have a happy face scale of like happy to sad faces. And we go, which one of these do you feel? Is it number 5?
Yeah, I mean, in the States, there's a lot of, is your pain at a 1 being right. No pain, or a 10 being unbearable pain. I mean, in Australia, is it similar to that, or are there similar kind of methods to that in hospitals?
That is universal. Yeah, that's universal. Okay. And what that highlights exactly is there is no objective measure that we can utilize to measure somebody's painful experience. So if you had 2 nurses and one walked into a patient's room and tried to evaluate their pain objectively and write it down and then leave that room, and then nurse number 2 comes in to do the same thing, it's likely they would get 2 very different scores because there's no objective measure. There's no one universal way, unless you ask the patient or the person experiencing the pain to verbalize their experience. And so often you'll say, on a scale of 0 to 10, 0 being no pain at all, 10 being the most excruciating pain you've ever experienced, where does your pain sit? And that tends to be the best we've got.
But then even that can change. Because if you ask me, is the pain you're feeling right now, Jacob, is it's at a 10. It's the most excruciating pain I've ever felt. Yes, this is the most excruciating pain I've ever felt. Until tomorrow.
When it's one worse.
When I feel something worse. And now
Absolutely
that's the
correct.
new 10.
Yeah. And it's so subjective.
That's so true.
And I wanted to ask this question because when Nick and I used to work at a chronic pain program, we had a mentor, Dr. Mel Pohl, and he was just a really interesting person. But one of the things he used to do is he used to sit with the patients, and these patients are emotional, they're frustrated, they've become, dependent on medications. We're going to talk later about hyperalgesia and what that is. But one of the things he would do, and he would train us to do, is first, he would train us to empathize with the patients, because so many of them were being told, hey, the pain's all in your head. And he used to sit down on day 1 with those patients, and he'd say, 2 things I want everybody in here to remember. 1, all pain is real. So he would make sure they knew that, hey, we believe you, all pain is real. But then he'd say, 2, all pain is in your head.
Right.
Because pain has to do with neurons. Dr. Mike, what the hell is pain?
I think those 2 points are super important. So let's first define it, right? So pain is an unpleasant sensory or emotional experience described in terms of actual or potential tissue damage. So there's a lot to unpack there, but the first part is pain is an unpleasant experience. I think we can all agree we've all experienced pain, but It is an unpleasant experience that is an unpleasant sensory or emotional experience. So what that tells you is that something like physical trauma, something like a chemical burn, something like a significant temperature change, something like an obstruction in a hollow tube within your gastrointestinal tract, for example, all those things are a sensory cause of pain. But we all know we've all lost a loved one, or we've all had a breakup before, and we've all experienced that emotional pain. Pain, either whether it be physical or emotional, is still pain. And so that's the first part. The second part is it's described in terms of actual or potential tissue damage. So even that emotional pain, people will describe as though something is hurting in one way or another. And the actual or potential tissue damage is highlighting that often we'll experience pain as a warning. It's saying, hey, if you keep doing this thing, something's going to happen and it might be irreversible. It might even kill you. And so that might be, don't leave your hand too long in the hot water. Don't hold that hot pot, for example. And while it may not cause actual tissue damage, it might be an indication that you can cause potential tissue damage. So you pull that hand away and you have an adverse reaction. So at the end of the day, pain has evolved to change our behavior. And it's to change our behavior to save our lives, or at least to prevent us from injuring or damaging ourselves. So that's the first point there. But we know, like you stated, that it can get a little bit out of control. And while we can have physical trauma like a cut in our hand that can cause pain, there's actually two important points that everyone should be aware of: pain and nociception. So let's start with nociception. If you were to experience some sort of physical pain, so somebody were to cut you, or you put your hand in hot water, for example, those extremes in temperature or pressure or whatever it may be, they're recognized as a noxious stimuli. So something that can potentially cause damage. And luckily for us, we've got receptors in our body that can pick up noxious stimuli. And we term these nociceptors. And it doesn't matter what that may be. It may be that temperature or chemical or pressure or cut or whatever. And it picks it up, and then it transmits that signal through your neurons up to your brain for you to experience as pain. Now that's the difference between nociception and pain, is that nociception is objective. There is a stimulus that triggers receptors that then sends a signal, but then the experience is pain. And that experience can be modulated. It can be changed. And the pain that you experience, as that signal, that nociceptive signal comes up your spinal cord, it talks to your brain stem to make you wide awake, make sure, like if you've experienced some sort of pain, you find it's hard to sleep. And so it goes to a part of the brain stem called the reticular formation and says, hey, stay awake. You need to stay awake right now. And then it goes up to the hypothalamus, just this area that sits at the base of the brain, and it triggers the fight or flight response, called the sympathetic nervous system. And so that causes your heart to increase in regards to contractile force, and your pupils dilate and you begin to sweat, and it makes you want to do something about that pain. And then it goes to your amygdala so that you have a negative emotional response to that pain. So you have an aversive behavioral response. And then it goes to your cortex, of your somatosensory cortex, of a part that's mapped to the area that's damaged, so you know exactly, or potentially going to be damaged, so you know exactly where the issue arises. So all this is happening as it's traveling up to the brain, which highlights that pain is a matrix. It's a whole bunch of stuff together. But all of these things can be modulated in one way or another, and therefore it's subjective. So I think everyone needs to be aware of those differences. Nociception, noxious stimuli, it's objective. It can objectively be measured, but pain is the subjective side of it.
So this thing
So it is all in my head.
It is all in your head. See, I told you.
Yeah, but it is real.
It is also real.
Yeah.
But I mean, even as you're describing that, every piece that it's deeply neurological, right? Because we're talking about the sensory network, all the detector organs that are then sending signals back up to the brain. Pain is almost this alarm system where you can only hear the sound in your own head. Nobody else can hear your pain. And then that sense is it sounds like is designed to make you miserable enough that you address whatever the hell is causing this, because it wants to keep you alive. And I guess that leads to that other question. If we're describing what is pain, I guess that deeper question then is, why is pain? And I assume the simple answer is don't die. Like pain tell you not die things, so like you'll do the opposite of whatever pain's making you do. But it just feels more philosophical than that in so many ways, because there's like emotional pain and mental anguish and despair and pain that doesn't seem to serve a damn purpose. Like, why am I getting Charlie horse pain?
Well, and you can also get to a point where the pain is debilitating.
Right.
And so then it's like, well, if I'm being eaten by a tiger.
Hindering me, right? I'm walking with a limp because I'm having pain. That's slowing me down from the tiger. Right. And I don't know, maybe that's a malfunction. But when you think about that bigger, deeper question, Mike, of why is pain? Why did we develop this? And it seems to be something all living things have.
Yeah, yes, absolutely. I mean, there's pain pathways in some of the lowest level organisms and some of the oldest organisms, like the jawless fish, for example, evolutionarily quite old, has pain pathways and also has what we call endogenous opioid pathways, so pain relief pathways built into the system, which we can get to. But I think an important thing to highlight is, one, why do we have pain is to promote behavior that avoids any potential damage to the body. That's the first thing. But the second thing is that pain is a really interesting sensory pathway in the body if you compare it to other sensory pathways. So, for example, when you wake up in the morning and you put your socks on, you feel your socks on your feet for all of 10 seconds, and then you don't feel the socks on your feet for the rest of the day. Same with a hat. You put a hat on, you feel it for the first 10 seconds, then you don't feel it again. And this is because of something called desensitization. A lot of our sensory stimuli become desensitized because the body says, you don't need to keep feeling that. It's just going to bother you. We'll put it into the background. You don't need to worry about it. We'll still know about it, but your conscious awareness won't be aware of it. And that's common. It's common with touch. It's also common with sound, for example. It's also common with taste. But pain is different. You don't get desensitization with pain. You get sensitization. So a little pebble in your shoe can be irritating for the first 10 minutes, but after that, it becomes excruciating. So you become sensitized to pain because, like you said, it is an alarm system saying, hey, fix this, hey, fix this, hey, fix this, hey, fix this. And the problem is if you don't fix it, what ends up happening is you sensitize yourself so much that even if you do resolve it down the track, that you're so sensitized that even something little will cause pain. And so this is leading into chronic pain.
Yep. I was just going to say that this is probably where we get into the discussion about acute versus chronic pain and what the difference is between those two.
Well, and even what he's already describing, this sensitivity versus, and this is, Mike, I would love, we might just need to have you back every episode for the rest of the year because I want to take so many deep dives into neuroscience. So much of this, Our trade, we specialize in behavioral health and mental health, right? And so we're studying how humans interact at that macro level. But, we have some background in neuroscience just to understand the basics. But so much of what this amazing organ does and what it regulates and also what it chooses to do on its own without our conscious awareness, like sensitizing and desensitizing. Like you don't feel your hat after a while because your brain says, I've decided on your behalf that you no longer need this stimuli information. It's still happening, and I choose not to show it to you. Or that old paradox of like when you see somebody 100 yards away, or meters, or Celsius, whatever you people use.
Celsius.
Yeah, 100 Celsius.
You see somebody standing 100 Celsius away.
Right.
That's it.
And then, they shout, and you can see their mouth moving and you hear the sound simultaneously. But the speed of light is like 300 million times faster than the speed of sound. And your brain
The speed of light is not 300 times a million faster than the speed of sound.
Yeah, Celsius. And so it depends on how you measure.
Kangaroos.
Yes, I believe they measure in wallabies. But yeah, like your brain just choosing to synthesize information on your behalf. Or there's the old blind spot paradox, right? That like you're in your visual field, you have two blind spots that are huge. And if you close one eye, you don't see it. And your brain just patches that in on your behalf. Or I was telling the guys the other day at the bar, I have a big old nose. My brain is not letting me see that right now because it's decided that's always been there, you dummy. You don't need this. Our brains are crazy, Mike.
Yeah, it's amazing and crazy. And that's, I think, important when it comes to pain is because of that sensitization. You know, it brings me to when people say, you know, no pain, no gain. I hate that saying. I hate it, because if you experience pain, your aim should be to mitigate that pain. It should be to try and figure out how to remove that pain, because if it lasts, then you can put yourself into a bad situation, which is that chronic pain syndrome that can come about. So it's tricky. We've evolved it to protect us. We've evolved it as a behavioral response to avoid pain, to avoid anything that could be damaging. But again, when you have acute pain, meaning short-term pain, generally there's a cause, and if you get rid of the cause, the pain disappears. That's usually the acute pain. It's not long-lasting. And so often, an example of this would be trauma. You have something cutting your skin, for example, and you get inflammation. And so anytime you damage tissue that has a dedicated blood supply, you get something called inflammation, which we've all had. And there's 4 cardinal signs of inflammation, which is redness, heat, swelling, and pain. And so pain comes along for the ride when you get inflammation. And the reason why is not because you've cut the skin and so you've directly hit pain fibers. It's because when you damage your skin and damage the cells in that tissue, all those cells spill their guts. And their guts contain chemicals that actually trigger these nociceptors, these pain receptors, and trigger them to fire off. Now, if you have inflammation and you don't resolve that inflammation, you're constantly releasing those chemicals. And then it just keeps going around in a circle where you get pain, stimulates chemical release, pain, stimulates chemical, and then you get this sensitization point. And if it lasts too long, even if that skin heals and disappears, those cells have been sensitized enough now that even something that would not generally cause pain, it could just be touching the skin, might cause pain. And that's called allodynia. Or something that doesn't often cause much pain causes huge amounts of pain. And that's called hyperalgesia. And so these things can happen and is often the core of long-term or chronic pain syndromes. It's because something hasn't been fixed, something hasn't been resolved early on, and you've got this cycle that's exacerbating itself.
Man. So I want to pivot into now laying out the groundwork for chronic pain, but we're overdue for a break and I assume hilarious Australian trivia. So we're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we've still got Dr. Mike, and we're going to dive deeper into the psychology of pain. You're listening to Pod Therapy.
Today's episode is brought to you by Smitty Scoop, Jake Schneider, Carolyn Albert, Kevin Chamberlain, and Ben Stanley. If you'd like to sponsor the show, become a therapy producer at patreon.com/therapy. Our trivia theme in honor of our therapy producers this week is Australia.
Yeah!
Didn't see that
Top
coming.
of the morning to you.
Oh my God.
He's perfected it, everyone.
Yeah.
Okay. How many stars are on the Australian flag?
Oh, hell.
Is it A, 5, B, 6, C, 7, or D, 8?
So we got 5, 6, 7, or 8?
5, 6, 7, or 8. If you'd like to join the therapy producers and make the show possible, you can go to patreon.com/therapy and sign up. Again, that's patreon.com/therapy.
So, Mike,
I'm diving in. I
before
think it's 5.
You're going straight in with 5?
I'm going A.
My first thought was 1, but then I thought maybe that's Texas.
Well, it's definitely not 1.
So it's not 1.
Texas and Australia often confused for each other.
I've made that argument for years.
Yeah.
I think that they have a lot more in common.
I was just telling Laura the other day that I can't wait to go to Australia. I mean Texas for that wedding in
That's
next
right.
month.
And get that wonderful Australian barbecue.
Right.
We're in
I can't wait to take that 3-hour flight to Australia.
Yeah. It'll be fine. All right, so there's stars on the Australian flag. 5, 6, 7, or 8.
We should start
True or
there.
false?
True or false? I figured that's where I would start since I got Mike with me.
True.
Mike, clap once. just smack your hooves on the ground. All right, so you're going with 5. I'll take the high. I think I'll take 8. That feels right.
You're both wrong.
Hell yeah.
Is it 6?
It's 6.
God damn it.
So what does the 6 stars represent?
The Southern
That's
Cross,
to
I'm
you,
pretty
Mike.
sure. I think there's the Southern Cross and the Union Jack are the 2 things on our flag. I'm quite sure. I'm gonna Google it right now because it's I know half of it's stolen from there. There we go. So it's the Southern Cross. So if you have a look at the Australian flag, you got 5 stars, So if you look into the southern hemisphere sky, you'll see this thing called the Southern Cross, and it points north and south and east and west, basically. And we always get it pointed out to us as kids, and we have no idea why. And I think it's because it's on the flag. And then that star underneath the Union Jack, and the Union Jack's stolen from the Brits, I don't even know what that represents. So there you go.
I think it represents imperialism. I'm pretty sure that was 100% of what it was supposed to represent. So earlier, before we started the show, we were on Patreon together and we were chatting about how both of our sets of kids like an Australian cartoon that is brilliant and really fun. It's called Bluey. And one of the things, I was watching Bluey and it really hit me. There's an episode where they celebrate Christmas in Bluey's house. And they go for a Christmas swim. And they have a Christmas barbecue. And I'm like, the hell is going on right now? And like, I'm just staring at this and my kids are looking at me and they go, Daddy, what the hell is going on right now?
Hemispheres are what's going on.
And I was like, And so I looked that up and I'm like, okay.
You had to look that up?
Yeah, man. Like, I don't know what's going on. It's a
Christmas
kid's cartoon. So you guys celebrate Christmas in the dead heat of summer.
Yeah. We always have a Barbie, which is a barbecue, and we often go for a swim, and most of the time we do it at the beach. So it's a lot of fun. I spent a winter Christmas in Europe a couple of years ago, and that was nice and cozy. But nothing beats an Australian Christmas. When you're at the beach, you got friends and family over, you're all outside, you always have seafood. Seafood is the Christmas meal that you have.
So funny.
And it's great. It's great fun. The kids can go out and play. You know, they just jump in the pool. It's awesome. It is brilliant.
That sounds like a way better Christmas than ours. I mean, we have chestnuts roasting on an open fire. They have freaking shrimp kebabs.
That's for sure.
Australia. So.
We say prawns.
Oh, are
just
those?
to correct that.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that's
They're
that
a bit
shrimp
bigger
on
than
the
shrimp.
Barbie thing. It's a barbecue. That's what you're saying. It's put another shrimp on
That's
the
right.
barbecue.
Yeah, and I think the joke was
You're
we don't
learning,
say
buddy.
shrimp. I don't think
You
we've
say, put
ever
another
said shrimp.
prawn on the Barbie.
Correct.
Wow, that was really misrepresented to us, wasn't it?
I know. Nice going,
really.
Jim
Gun
Carrey.
to my head, I would have thought it was shrimp as much as I would have thought it was Barbie. That is one phrase to me.
No.
That they say prawn.
And they just walk around comparing knife sizes.
That also, I've been
Yes.
told.
Yeah,
And
that's very
apparently
true.
hunting crocodiles.
Yeah.
Yeah, these are the big
Well, we don't have guns,
Australian
so that's
sports.
why we do. That's why we
Right.
compare knives.
That's true. Do you guys eat kangaroo?
Yes.
Wow.
Yeah,
That
it's
sounds like a delicacy.
I ate it the other day. It is gamey. It's very high in protein. It's a very dense red meat, and you have to cook it medium rare in order for it to be nice. If you cook it any longer, it's chewy as can be. But you've also got to be careful that you get it from a good supplier so you don't get any worms within that meat.
That
So-
is horrifying.
But it's common.
Kangaroo.
You can get it at the local supermarket. Kangaroo.
Kanga don't.
It's actually quite nice meat, but you can get it at local supermarket. I think you can get it at nearly every supermarket
That's
here.
crazy to me. See, I've seen a lot of videos.
Kangaroo are pretty much just the deer of Australia.
Well, they
So
just
it's
look like roided out deer. Like that's it.
I think they're more common. I think kangaroo are more common in Australia than deer are in the U.S.
That's amazing.
Maybe where you're
when you
from.
see, I mean, I've seen these
There's
guys.
a ton of deer where I grew up. But
That's
I mean,
true.
like,
I've seen kangaroo in the videos, and I don't know if I'm just selectively getting one like sample size of these things. They look like a mad scientist created them. That's it. Like they are just jacked out of their mind. And I've seen these videos where like they chase people down and beat the hell out of them. Like there's one where this guy's parachuting in and he lands and there's like a kangaroo running up to him. He's wearing like a GoPro and he goes, "Hey, Roo," and this thing just sucker punches him in the face like 3 times and he's screaming trying to get him away. Are these things like a public nuisance to you,
how
Mike?
many times today have you been punched by a kangaroo?
Yeah.
That's
You have
what
to
we're really- that's what
run
we're
to
asking.
your car.
Only 3 times.
Yeah.
Oh, that's pretty
but
good. That's a good day.
It's pretty good. But let me tell you firstly, kangaroos are recognized in some parts of Australia as a pest. That's how many we have.
Wow.
Right? You've got different types of kangaroos. So the biggest one is the big red, and they're like 9-10 feet tall. They're
I
enormous.
did not know. I didn't know there were different types of kangaroos, and I did not know that there was a type of kangaroo that was an enormous monster.
That's a grizzly bear.
It will whoop your ass. If you see the videos.
I know kangaroos will beat the shit out of you. I didn't know that they could be 9 to 10 feet tall.
Oh my God.
That's terrifying.
I used to live. So where I live right now, the only kangaroos we really have are wallabies, and they're about 3-4 feet high. So they're not very tall, and they're all over the place. I mean, when I drive home tonight, I'll see at least 3 or 4 dead on the side of the road. Very common to be hit by a car. Like, I'll give you an example of what happened to a mate of mine. So he was driving his ute, which I think is a pickup truck in the States. Yeah. So, it's got a tray at the back. And so a ute is a very common Australian car. So he was driving his ute home at night time. And as he's driving, it's common for roos to jump out in front of you on the road. Now, if you hit them with your car is done, right? Generally, it's done in. But what had happened was he hit a big red. And because the kangaroo is so tall, he got the underside of the kangaroo. So it didn't hit the body. And so he hit it and pulled over and then had a look and couldn't find it and thought, okay, it's just jumped away.
It stole his car.
Yeah. As he got out to look around, he looked in, he jumped in the car, took off.
Ran his ass over. Went back to his house. Ate his dinner.
That kangaroo is now the prime minister.
That's right. Married his wife, fathered his children.
It was actually a very sweet story.
Yeah, it had a happy ending.
It's a success story.
The kids took family photos with him every year. He walked with the daughter down the aisle. At a retirement party, everybody came.
So he hopped back in his car. He thought, okay, hit the kangaroo, but it was all good. They're big, they're pretty tough. So he got home and he was driving quite a way. He got home and he lives in the city. So he lives in like an outer suburb of the city. And went home, went to bed, woke up in the morning. As he walked to his ute, he saw that the kangaroo had gone over the top of his car and landed in the tray. No. So he had this
a bad morning.
About
it was pissed.
7 foot, 250 kilogram, which is 500 odd pound.
Yeah, the red kangaroos average up to about 200 pounds. That's the average.
Yeah.
So that means a big one is going to be like,
they
350, 400 pounds.
They can all dunk on you.
So I used to live next to a big red. They call it a farm, but no one actually farmed them. It's just where a lot of them tended to be. And so they would be jumping across the road all the time. We had one. I was driving down the road and it jumped over. I could see it bounding. So every time it bounds, it probably, covers maybe 10 meters with each bound. It's enormous. And so it was bounding towards the road as I'm driving at the same rate. And I'm going, oh shit, either I'm going to have to brake or he's going to have to stop. And as I went, this roo jumped over the entire road, both lanes of the road and over the bonnet of the car to the other side in one bound. They are monsters. They love fighting dogs. They'll get up on their back tail and they'll kick their legs. And these legs are huge and the claws are enormous. Anyway, they can be dangerous. You don't want to be fighting.
We haven't mentioned it yet, but you are a very physically fit man. You stay very healthy, and we can see that. But also on your Instagram, you're very promoting of physical health, and you demonstrate a lot of that. Now I understand why. See, now I'm not even impressed. Really, you need to double. Okay, whatever you're doing, you need to 2-time that, because these things are coming for you. It's all self-defense at this point. If you're not ready, they'll take everything.
On a scale of 1 to 10, how much does it hurt to get punched by a kangaroo?
It would be close.
Show me on the pain scale. Show me this happy face. What's the pain index of getting swatted by a roo? They're dangerous, man. So speaking of this big picture of pain, before we took the break, you taught us kind of what pain is. Yes, it's this physical, but also neurological phenomenon. It is fundamentally subjective, but it has this evolutionary purpose. But sometimes, and one of the things we were talking about earlier, pain becomes chronic. And you were kind of teaching us, okay, so it has this inverse kind of sensitivity thing. Your other senses tend to dull out over time and dismiss the data, not pain. Pain gets angry. And the longer you ignore pain, the more your brain's going to say, hey, stupid, start paying attention to this. But of course,
Yeah.
one of the problems with our brain having so much authority to turn the volume knob up on the pain alarm is that sometimes that's not helpful information, or sometimes the problem maybe has been resolved, or the doctors are struggling to discover what they need to do to turn off the pain. So I guess another question I have to take us into this next piece is kind of, is there such a thing as false pain? Yes, all pain's real. Yes, all pain's in your head. But what is this phenomenon of, I guess, the alarm going off, but there's nothing to fix?
Yes. And this is where a lot of the difficulties come for people who experience chronic pain is they'll go and see a physician. Often they'll come in and they've experienced pain for years, generally, and they'll say, look, I'm experiencing pain. It may be located X, Y, or Z, or in multiple areas. And the physician will look and say, look, I can't see any cause of that pain. And then that often results in the patient thinking, well, it's all in my head. You know, if there's no recognizable cause, then I'm thinking this pain. And while all pain is in our brain and is a product of perception, it is still a real pain. And this is where that chronic pain really comes into play. So if we have a look at, again, some sort of nociceptive pain, like that inflammation we were talking about, all those chemicals are being released. They're flooding that area that's been damaged. It stimulates neurons to send signals up to the brain, and you get all those responses we spoke about before. But because the pain system by definition is an alarm, it continues to sensitize. So when it releases some chemicals, the signal from the nervous system actually feeds back to tell it to release more and continues to feed back to release more and more, because it's waiting, and this is part of a process called homeostasis, where your body wants to maintain a nice internal, happy, healthy balance. If something gets pushed out of whack, we want to bring it back into range. And sometimes, like with pain, the only way you can bring something back into range is by pushing it out too far. So, for example, if you keep pushing pain and making it worse and worse and worse, you think, oh, that's bad. But if that then motivates you to avoid that pain and remove the stimulus, then the pain's gone and is mitigated, and therefore there's nothing to amplify. But if you don't remove that stimulus, it amplifies to a point where it actually teaches some of those cells, either in the spinal cord or in the periphery where the damage has actually been primarily occurred. It actually teaches them to remain sensitized, and it actually makes them easier to send a painful stimulus. And that's called lowering the threshold. So if you think about a high jumper, for example, the higher the bar, the more difficult it is to get over. The same thing happens with neurons. There is a threshold, and the higher that threshold is, the more difficult it is for a neuron to fire off. If you lower the threshold of a neuron, it's very easy for it to fire off. And so if you sensitize a neuron, you're dropping that bar, and you make it really easy for it to fire off. And sometimes just simply touching that area makes it fire off, and therefore you get allodynia. Or a small painful stimulus that would just not be too annoying actually becomes a huge painful stimulus, and that's called that hyperalgesia. And again, this can happen both peripherally but in the spinal cord as well. So you're rewiring the spinal cord to make yourself more sensitive. And so that initial cause can be resolved. It's gone. And then you've put up with this pain for years, because people tend to just put up with pain. As they get older, you're more likely to get or experience pain. But people think that, pain is just a product of aging, when it's not. Pain is actually not a product of aging. Just because you're getting older doesn't mean you should be experiencing pain. Nobody truly should be experiencing pain. So the point I'm trying to get across here is, if you experience pain in the short term or the acute, try and fix it. Now, that may be go to your physician and they may say, look, take some NSAIDs, for example. So NSAIDs are non-steroidal anti-inflammatory. So this includes things like ibuprofen and aspirin and celecoxib, for example. They're three of the most common. Now, paracetamol could fit in there, but doesn't truly fit within the NSAID category. But what do
is that?
Is they get paracetamol.
Yeah.
We call it Panadol here. I don't know what you would call it. Is it Tylenol?
Find out.
Tylenol?
We call it Midol.
I think Tylenol. Midol?
What did you say you called it there?
Midol?
We call it
somebody else got the
paracetamol.
joke.
Okay, I'll find it.
Midol's for menstrual cramps. But go on.
So paracetamol
and acetaminophen.
Yeah, so
and acetaminophen. That's
Acetaminophen.
Yeah, that's it.
Yep. Acetaminophen.
Like Tylenol.
That's
Yep.
Yeah.
Yes. So ibuprofen, celecoxib, which we call Celebrex in Australia, and aspirin, they're non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs and are often given for acute pain. And the reason why is because those chemicals that the cells release when they're damaged, you can stop those chemicals from being produced and released by giving these drugs. And therefore, stopping the inflammation stops the chemical release, stopping the stimulation of the neurons. And so you can stop pain early through these non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs. But they've also got off-target effects, for example. So the chemicals that those drugs stop are called prostaglandins. And the problem here is that prostaglandins do a lot of things. Prostaglandins don't just stimulate pain, they actually also form the gut lining to protect your stomach from digesting itself. And so if you take too much aspirin, it can damage your stomach because you're stopping the prostaglandins both at the area of the pain but also in your stomach, and the acid begins to dissolve the lining, and you can get obviously issues there. Hence why then people tend to take antacids while they're taking aspirin, for example. But anyway, I digress from that. NSAIDs are just one mainstay anti-inflammatory and also analgesic medication that can be used. But they work more so on the periphery, in the area that's been damaged. But then there's other drugs that work more centrally, and this is where the opioids come into play.
So already, one of the things that I think you're teaching me that I think is really important is I'm hearing you say, look, with chronic pain, the longer you ignore the little blinking red light, the bigger and more powerful that light's going to be. And so it could even get to a place in your life where you finally address the problem that light was indicating. But because your body has now gotten so sensitive, you may continue to experience what we might call chronic or false or phantom pain, even though the original problem has been resolved. And now you're dealing with that. And so I think I'm hearing you say, look, when you notice the pain early, let's get to it. Whether we need to go get some kind of problem addressed, or we have to actually do something physical. Or I think I'm also hearing you say, look, even the therapeutics, even taking NSAIDs or just general stuff that's addressing the sensation of pain, that's actually helping because the red light will not grow. The pain phenomenon will not get worse. So at least you're attending to and keeping that pain from oversensitizing. Is that kind of what you're teaching us? Is that's actually a good intervention?
Yes, that's correct. And that is if it's an inflammatory caused pain, such as a direct physical trauma. But there's other types of acute pain like neuropathic pain, and that can also be chronic as well. And this is direct damage to nerves itself. So instead of directly damaging tissue through a cut, for example, the nerves themselves can have some lesion or damage associated with it. And this is common in diabetes, particularly uncontrolled diabetes, where high levels of glucose that remain in the bloodstream and they're locked away because the insulin's not working properly to pull it out. The glucose starts to damage the tissues. It starts to damage the blood vessels, but also starts to damage the neurons as well. And then this direct damage can cause pain because you're directly injuring the neurons itself. So if you've got an inflammatory-based pain, it's always good to go see your physician, because some NSAIDs aren't recommended for some people because they may have some other underlying comorbidities or health conditions where the doctor may say, hey, I don't want you to take this because it may not be great for your kidneys or your liver or your gut. So always see your physician. But like you were saying, if you are experiencing pain, you should go seek some sort of medical intervention to try and help fix it. And it's not always pharmacological, particularly when it comes to chronic pain. There seems to be a lot of evidence now looking at just activity and its benefit with chronic pain. And so I'm sure you guys are aware of passive versus active treatments. And so a passive treatment is, here's your medication, off you go, see how you cope with that. And an active treatment requires the individual to actually get up and do something. And that's a lot more difficult, particularly when it comes to adherence. But we know physical exercise in some cases are just as good, if not better, than opioids for chronic pain.
And that's actually, I'm glad you brought that up, because that's a really good point, because I've seen that happen before when we're talking about with chronic pain and mobility, where an individual will, they become immobilized because of their pain, so like, it hurts if I raise my shoulder up past here, so I'm only going to raise it up to here. So now I've decreased mobility. And so now it starts to hurt when I move it here. So I decrease it more.
Yeah.
And then you just get to a point where now you can't really move at all. So
Yes.
is there kind of that line, because obviously one of the things that you had said before is like, if you're experiencing pain, we should do something about that. Yeah. Right. We don't want to ignore that. And on the opposite end of that, is there kind of a line where, someone who's dealing with chronic pain, where they have to adjust their expectations, where on that pain scale, they may not get to a 0, and you kind of have to learn to function at a 3. And so even though you're immobilized, do you kind of learn to live at a 3, but still be mobile and active at a 3 on that pain scale?
And that's a super tricky question. And that's one of the problems with pain, is because it's cyclical in the sense that it can, and we haven't even spoken about emotion yet and the role that emotion can play, because obviously that feeds into motivation and your want or desire to do something about that pain, and reward systems and so forth. But if we talk about some sort of musculoskeletal based injury that's occurred, like you're saying with the shoulder, your first initial response will be, oh, if I lift my arm, I'm experiencing pain, I'm going to avoid lifting my arm. And that makes total sense. And maybe if you do avoid lifting your arm and you take some non-steroidal anti-inflammatories, it resolves, and over time you can lift your arm. So, but sometimes it won't. And sometimes people will get chronic pain in that area if they don't relieve it in one way or another. And so this is where you've got to find the right health professional to help you in that situation, which would be seeing a physical therapist or a physiotherapist and talking through what sort of mobility can I work through, what pain is pain that can be worked through, and what pain is pain that can't be worked through. And so that's an important thing to highlight, particularly when it's musculoskeletal based pain. Now, this doesn't necessarily apply with other types of pain, like necessarily neuropathic pain or certain types of chronic pain. But for musculoskeletal pain, it's really worth getting that physical therapist to help work through.
Well, and you're describing, I think, a really important paradox about pain. And again, not even getting into the volumes of information that emotional and mental plays in this, but what the goal of pain management or treatment is. And in America, and I get it's patient by patient, it is very tricky. There's many systems at play. We need a team approach. But in America, one of the big challenges that we had was the treatment for pain, any pain at all, became elimination of pain. That was the goal. Eliminate as much of up to 100% of discomfort. And that's a worthy goal, but it just so happened that the medications capable of just removing the sensation of pain often decrease the patient's overall functioning over time and also created dependency. And of course, I'm alluding to this problem of opioids. And so it's an interesting paradox that we have when we have to ask ourselves medically, what is the patient's goal? What is my treatment plan? Is my goal with this particular patient to eliminate all pain, or is my goal to equip them to manage chronic pain? And in mental health land, obviously we don't have any of the tools to eliminate physiological pain. We don't have access to prescriptions. We're not prescribers. We're not physical therapists. Our job usually steps in once that person has already gone through all the systems. And for a lot of my patients, and this is, a question to you, Dr. Mike, that I don't even expect you to have an answer for, because I think when we're talking about pain, we are talking about one of the most emotionally and logically frustrating parts of human physiology. It is this black box of mystery in so many ways, and we don't always have control over it. But I've had a lot of patients over the years that'll come in with agony, just agonizing chronic pain, especially gastrointestinal stuff. And they are not faking. They are not malingering. They have pit stopped at every single place in all of healthcare. They've talked to neurologists. They've gotten scans. They've talked to GIs. They've gotten colonoscopies. They've had MRIs. They've had every single check that there is. They've tried every single medication that there is, every single operation. There is no physiological cause for this, except that maybe nerves are being nerves, and for whatever reason, the great complex system that is humanity decided this body's going to hurt. And here I am as a therapist trying to teach them emotional coping skills for this big, huge, inevitable problem. And as I alluded to a second ago, I don't expect you to have an answer in your pocket for this, but I wonder if you can speak to the phenomenon of mystery pain, when maybe or maybe you disagree with that philosophically. Maybe you would say, oh no, philosophically there is always 100% of the time a cause. Or maybe you'd say, hey man, there's these weird things, like we had to make up names for them, like fibromyalgia, where we don't even know what the hell's going on. Speak to this problem of the mystery pain where everything else has been ruled out.
So I think one of the issues historically, at least in science, is that pain has been dichotomized, where researchers will either research nociceptive pain or they'll research emotional-based pain. But they won't look at the two together, even though all roads lead to a painful experience. And there's, the Venn diagram of emotion and nociception and pain overlaps significantly. Yet again, it's not covered within the literature. It is not just split apart, it's compartmentalized, which makes the whole thing far more difficult. Like you were talking about before, one of the other issues is that somebody will have fibromyalgia, for example, and they'll go see a rheumatologist. Somebody will have irritable bowel syndrome and they'll go see a gastroenterologist. Somebody will have another form of chronic pain and go see that particular specialist. But the issue is that they're seeing the specialist because the pain is localized to an area that's within that person's specialty, but they're not a pain specialist and they're not a chronic pain specialist. And so they go, look, and often if they go see a surgeon, they deal all in anatomy. They go, there is nothing anatomically wrong with you. I can't fix it. And then that's disparaging. The person just goes, what's wrong with me? What is my problem? What is my issue? And then psychologically, that's negatively impactful because they don't get answers, and it sort of just negatively reinforces that it's all in your head. Now, everyone's pain is real, and it should be treated as such, regardless of whether there's an identifiable or non-identifiable cause. And that's really important. Everyone should understand that their pain is real. The way it's treated is obviously more difficult. Pain education is a field that's really coming up now to help people deal with the pain, particularly chronic pain that they're experiencing, which basically is just talking to somebody about their pain. And similar to what we're doing now, talking about the processes that can happen and why these things can happen actually shows to help people feel empowered and benefits them in regards to the pain in which they're feeling. And so pain education seems to be a really important side of this. Another side is, again, if possible, active forms of therapy, active forms of treatment, including physical exercise, again, where possible. But like you were saying before, everyone's pain is different. And so everyone does need to be treated on a one-to-one basis. I don't want to say something and then a listener go, sure, I'm going to now do this, right, because I don't know you and I don't know your situation. You should always go see an expert or physician or whoever from a podcast.
Always a good idea.
Absolutely right.
Even from Dr. Mike. So we're going to take another quick break because we want to make sure we cram in as much Australia knowledge as we can today. And when we come back, I want to talk a little bit about how we treat chronic pain when it's not a mystery. But then, hey, there's a complex side to that too. So you're listening to Pod Therapy.
Today's episode is brought to you by Smitty Scoop, Jake Schneider, Carolyn Albert, Kevin Chamberlain, and Ben Stanley. If you'd like to sponsor a show, become a therapy producer at patreon.com/therapy. Jim and Jacob, what is the capital of Australia?
Oh, God.
Is it A, Sydney, B, Perth, C, Adelaide, D, Canberra, or E, Brisbane?
Huh. Sydney's the one that has the building that looks like a clamshell.
Okay, I believe
Jacob,
you're referring to the
correct.
Opera House.
That one. I've
believe
seen it
it's
in
called
Finding Nemo.
The Sydney Opera House.
I've seen it in Finding Nemo. That's how I know these things.
Oh, it's okay.
I'm going to go with Sydney because it's the only place that I've seen in a cartoon. Besides Brisbane, apparently, which is also in a cartoon. Now I'm kind of swayed.
Yes.
I mean, the cartoon you've only talked about this show.
It's so good.
Is Brisbane.
It's so good. I'm going to go with Sydney because I know it has a big clam house.
Solid logic.
Okay. Yeah, it's. I know it's not Adelaide. So Adelaide off the list.
Okay.
What was the other one?
Perth, Canberra, or Brisbane?
I don't think it's Perth.
Can I compliment you on Canberra as well? Because many Americans say Canberra, and you're saying Canberra perfectly.
Canberra.
Nailed it. Congratulations.
Yes.
Your Australian
Very
accent
good.
is impeccable. Now learn to speak English.
That being said, I don't think that's the capital of Australia either. I think it's Sydney or Brisbane.
Yeah, well, I took one, fool.
You did. I'll take Brisbane.
Yeah, take the under.
You both are 0 for 2. You
Oh,
suck.
damn it.
He's not right.
Is it Perth?
Canberra.
Oh, shit.
Canberra.
Damn. Wow.
And it's very small. It's national territory. It's a tiny place. It's where all the politicians go. It's like our DC. And there's not much to do there. There's a lot of roundabouts, and that's it.
What's it close to?
Good restaurants.
What's a big place that it's close to?
It's sort of embedded in New South Wales.
Oh,
So it's near Sydney.
okay.
Sydney, the place with the opera house.
Correct, Jim.
Correct.
Well done.
Or as they call it in Australia, the Grand Ole Opry.
Dr. Mike, how are we doing on
So
time?
close.
We're good. We're good.
All right.
So as we get to the end of the show, we've covered some big stuff, man. I appreciate the deep dive. Go ahead.
Well, I just want to say just real quick with the whole point with the emotion. Like, I think the big thing that stuck with me, and hopefully a lot of the listeners caught this too, is that the way that you describe how pain goes through the body, up through the brain, when it gets to the amygdala, that's that emotional piece. So you really can't talk about pain without also talking about the emotion that goes with it. They're connected. They can't be disconnected.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And here's the connection with those. So it's not just the amygdala. There's another area called the anterior cingulate cortex, which plays a big role in both pain and emotion, and those two things coming together. Pain speaks to a whole bunch of diverse areas in the brain. But if we think about the emotion, you experience something painful, you have a negative association with it because then you want to avoid it. So your emotions change, your behavior changes, and you avoid it. But the thing is that a negative emotion can actually exacerbate pain. So while pain can exacerbate a negative emotion can exacerbate pain. And if you remain in this horrible cyclical situation, they can feed off one another. And there's obviously evidence out there about people who have depression, for example. They tend to experience more pain, and vice versa. People who have chronic pain tend to be more likely, or it's a risk factor for having depression. And so there's this thing that moves through, which again is another important point to avoid pain, because you don't want to have that negative aspect associated with it. And like you were saying earlier about avoiding movements, if an area is painful, you're going to avoid certain movements, and you're going to have, again, behaviors that change your physiology, the way you shift in your own environment, the way you limit yourself. And that's what a lot of people with fibromyalgia, for example, or chronic pain, they'll do. They'll intentionally alter the way they move because they're worried about experiencing pain, and then that leads to a negative emotional experience, and then that exacerbates the pain, and it keeps flipping round and round.
You know, I'm glad you guys are talking about this, because I think two things that I find really profound about that relationship. One, even in our work in mental health, like I said, when I get a chronic pain patient, I'm their last stop, and they always come to me very begrudgingly. They've usually come to me because a colleague has sent them to me. And not all of our colleagues have great bedside manner because they're frustrated, right? If you're a cardiologist and you're like, look, I don't know why you have chest pain. Everything's working. Everything's going where it's supposed to go. I've run every single test there is. You're crazy. Go see a shrink. Well, then the person, comes into my office and they're like, I don't.
Maybe I'm crazy.
Yeah, but it's frustrating for them, and it's really hard for me to earn their work, like to not their work, but to get them in a place where they can benefit from therapy. Because in the very beginning, they're very against it. They're like, I don't want it to all be in my head. I'm mad that I'm even talking to you, and I have to try to explain to them that all pain is real. Like, the very first thing is to validate it. The second thing is to explain, I don't know what's causing this, neither does the cardiologist, but I 100% believe that every piece of your pain is real and going through every legitimate system that pain can travel through. But the third thing, pain is emotional. And at first people hear that and they feel like I'm being dismissive. And I say, no. What I mean is The only lever you and I may be able to reach out and get our hands on might be this one. Your cardiologist failed to get to the anatomical reason for this. A pain specialist failed to get into the nervous system and desensitize these things and make the pain stop. But maybe you and I can get a hold of the one lever we might have a chance at changing, and that could be emotion. And at first, people are very dismissive of that, but I have to help them understand this actually matters in the equation. And these therapeutic coping skills that we're going to work through, and even as you were talking about, Dr. Mike, languaging your pain, the education of pain, expressing it, wrapping it in words the way we can do as Homo sapiens, and what that can do to bring relief to you psychologically and therefore physically, because there is no difference between body and brain. There is no such thing as health without mental health. There is no such thing as mental health without physical health. It's all one. The Venn is a circle. So getting people to understand that is a huge point, and it speaks to kind of the synthesis you're talking about emotion.
Oh yeah, the emotional modulation of pain is important, and you could do a very simple experiment to highlight this. So you can get somebody who's in a happy mood and expose them to a particular noxious stimulus and ask them to rate their pain, and get somebody who's in an unhappy mood to do the same thing. And the person who's unhappy, the painful stimulus is worse. So this is a very simple experiment, but shows how just emotion can modulate your experience of pain. Now think about that long term. Now, if you're long term, and this is a short, sharp, quick and easy to change emotion. But what if somebody is in a depressive state where neurotransmitters are in flux, different balance, their emotional state is in flux, and now they're experiencing some sort of painful stimulus? How do you think that's going to be perceived? It's going to be horrible. And so, like you said, sometimes the only lever you can pull is that of the emotive. And it's important to highlight.
So a lot of people, in their quest to get rid of pain, to get out of pain, which is a noble quest, nobody's judging you for it. All of human evolution has designed you to want to get out of pain and seek relief. And so, as I mentioned earlier, in the American medical model for many, many years, the goal, the treatment plan, was not to deal with managing any amount of pain, but rather to eliminate it entirely, even if that caused dysfunction to the person. And of course, this interesting medication was created, the opioid. You earlier alluded to how even primitive organisms have opioid receptors. And so this idea of the opioid came out, it became a pill form. It has killed tons of people in America and across the world, but especially in our nation. And now we're backtracking, and we're trying to help people break this dependence on it. But one of the problems that Nick and I used to treat in the pain rehab that we worked in was that here we had patients who were given opioids to make the pain go away. And these miracle medicines did that. But then, magically, the pain sensors broke through again. It was as if the nerves were a damn hydra, and as soon as you cut off one, it popped back 4 times as strong, and then there was only one way to fix that, Dr. Mike. You need more of the medicine. And on and on and on this goes. Can you explain to us in kind of that brief, big picture way what the hell opioids are and what the hell is happening with its relationship to pain sensors, that it both turns them off and somehow magnifies them over time?
Yeah, it's a good question. And so first thing people should realize is that the body has its own opioid system, and we call it the endogenous opioid pathway or the descending inhibitory pathway. Really great names. So
also
when
the name
that
of my
painful
band
stimulus, the descending inhibitory pathway sounds like a ska band. So as it goes into the spinal cord and travels up, and you know how I said up the spinal cord, talks to the brainstem, you become wide awake, talks to the hypothalamus, fight or flight, talks to the amygdala, negative response, talks to the somatosensory cortex, you can locate that pain. What happens is that all those areas feed back down, and they go back down to the brainstem. And at the brainstem, they tell serotonin-producing neurons that travel all the way down to the spinal cord to release serotonin at an area where the painful stimulus is coming into the spinal cord. And the release of that serotonin actually helps, it binds to receptors on a neuron that sits between 2 neurons called an interneuron, which then tells it to release endogenous or the body's own opioids, and they bind to opioid receptors. And so the body's own opioids are endorphins, enkephalins, and dynorphins, and they bind to receptors like mu, delta, and gamma, right? But at the end of the day, when those opioids bind to those receptors, it inhibits the pain neuron, the nociceptor, from sending the signal. That's basically what it does, inhibits it. So there's no more upward travel for this neuron to go to the brain. And that's how we can modulate it. It mutes the alarm system. And you see this when, footy players, they'll go in for a tackle, they'll get smashed, they'll break their arm, they'll cut their face, and they keep playing. And they do not look like they're in any visible form of pain. And the reason why that's the case is because that painful stimulus that's gone up has now fed back down to the endogenous opioids, and it's just flooded the spinal cord and brain with all these opioids and just muted that alarm system. It doesn't last long, but it lasts long enough to sort of just cancel it out a little bit, and often gets released in high intensity sorts of pain. So what researchers thought was, well, we've got these opioids and we've got these receptors. What if we were to synthetically make or even find a plant that can release a chemical that binds to these receptors? And that's opioids. So opioids are natural or synthetic drugs that bind to our endogenous opioid receptors. And opiates are actually derived from poppies. So this is like heroin and morphine and codeine, for example. And they do the same thing. They bind to those receptors. So because the way those receptors work, again, in the spinal cord and in the brain, if you throw a bunch of opioids at them, they'll bind to their receptors and then inhibit the neuron from firing off. So the pain signal is, like you said, muted. It's dampened down. But if you do this for too long over time, again, the body likes to correct itself. So, and I'm going to digress a little bit to highlight the point. Alcoholics, for example, when they drink a lot of alcohol, they start to play around with their brain chemistry. It starts to push down the neurotransmitter called GABA that relaxes things, and it bumps up the neurotransmitter, other way around. It bumps up the relaxation neurotransmitter GABA and pushes down the glutamate ones. And the brain doesn't like this. So the brain responds by flipping it. It increases the amount of glutamate receptors because it's going, well, where's all this glutamate gone? I'm going to boost the receptors so I can get that signal back, and I'm going to drop down the GABA receptors because there's too much. And then when somebody gets off alcohol, well, the system's flooded with glutamate again, but there's tons of receptors. So they get this hyperstimulation of their brain, and they can have seizures and all these other issues. So because the brain tries to correct itself if you're chronically exposing it to something, there can be an issue that arises. And the same thing happens, or I should say a similar process happens with opioids, where you start saturating the system with opioids, the receptors go, oh, there's too many of us, and they start to disappear. And so that's why the threshold goes up. You now need more opioids to get the same analgesic effect. And because those receptors have disappeared, it's easier for you to get a painful stimulus because your ability to dampen it has gone. So you get not just an increased threshold, which requires more opioids, but you also get a hypersensitivity that occurs, also known as hyperalgesia. And that's the issue that can arise.
So if I'm hearing you right, it's almost just like with a Zoom conversation, which so many people are used to now. It sounds like the medicine sort of turns down the microphone sensitivity down and down and down and down and down. And then the listener piece of the brain turns up the volume on their headphones. And they're going, oh, I can't hear you. I can't hear you. So they're turning it up, and the volume on the microphone's going down and down and down. And then all of a sudden, you come back at full volume, and it's like, whoa, now it's ringing in your ears because it's way too sensitive.
Perfect analogy.
Thank you. I am a doctor. Good job.
I love
You're
that.
not a real doctor.
Not like him, but I'm trying. He has that cool
I'm
authoritative
going to use that. I think that's really good.
So hyperalgesia, when people start to get extra sensitive to pain, now they take more of the medicine. And unfortunately, this medicine starts to have debilitating effects on lots of systems in their body, but also, interestingly, has psychoactive effects. And they start to induce euphoria, right, and getting high off of it as well. And there's the sensation of relief. A lot of our patients that have chronic pain and develop opioid or opiate addictions will come to us and say, look, I'm not addicted to this. I just want to feel, and this is the master word, normal. I just want to feel normal. and I have to keep doing this. Now, Nick and I have treated this over the years, but can you explain to us some of what happens when we start to remove those opioids and those opiates, and how the body over time starts to self-correct?
So when you are exposing, for example, the spinal cord and the brain with all those opioids, and those receptors dampen in the spinal cord, those pain receptors, they dampen. But in the brain itself, particularly the reward center that's associated with dopamine, it sort of does the opposite. It sort of amplifies the signal. So when you get opioids, it actually promotes more dopamine to be released and bind to the reward centers. And so you get that feeling of satisfaction, and basically you're rewarded for taking the opioid, at least neurologically in that sense. So then when you remove it, it's going to be more difficult for you to get that reward. And so it sort of feels as though it's, you go into that more depressed, and I'm not saying depressed in the clinical definition of depressed, I'm saying neuronal wise, like excitability wise, it becomes depressed once it's removed. And so you've got the flip side of the coin. The spinal cord is happening totally opposite to the brain itself, where the spinal cord gets dampened from too many opioids, but the brain gets amplified. And so when you remove it, you can think, well, the spinal cord gets amplified and then the brain gets dampened. And so, and this is an oversimplistic way of looking at it. So
that's the way we like to look at things here.
And obviously, if you oversimplify, you lose a bit of detail there. But it's the evidence at the moment, or at least some of the systematic reviews that have come out, have shown that while this hyperalgesia is obviously something that you don't want, because it means that, and the increased threshold as well requires more and more opioids. Those receptors that are in the spinal cord and the brain to give you that analgesic response, and also the euphoria as well, they're located in lung tissue, and it depresses your respiratory system. And so if somebody has too many opioids, it can result in respiratory failure. Well, that's one of the ways that people can actually die from too many opioids, is you stop breathing. But it also goes to the gut, and it tells the neurons of the gut to stop firing, similar to in the spinal cord. And so if the neurons in the gut aren't firing, the muscles aren't contracting, and people get constipation from the opioids. It can go to a specific part of the brain that deals with, it's called the chemoreceptive trigger zone. Again, horrible name, but it gets stimulated when you need to vomit. And so opioids can stimulate that zone, and people can feel nauseated. So there's all these off-target effects, again, that can occur from opioids, particularly too many. And so withdrawal from those opioids are obviously going to have similar withdrawal effects that you can get from other drugs, because the body has responded to try and adapt to the changes. Just similar to somebody taking testosterone replacement. If your body makes your own testosterone, but if you introduce too much exogenous or testosterone from the outside, the body goes, I don't need to make any testosterone anymore, and reduces the amount of testosterone it makes. And then if you remove that testosterone, well, there's this effect where the body is now low on testosterone. And so it's a similar thing that's happening. It's part of homeostasis, the body trying to keep itself in a happy, healthy range, even though you're trying to push it out of whack.
Right. Mm-hmm. And opioids, I got to say, it's one of the most powerful things I've ever seen. I mean, not just in what we've done in substance abuse and addictions rehabs and watching people kick whenever they're going through the withdrawals. Of all the things I've watched people withdraw from, it is painful for me to watch them withdraw from opioids.
It's no fun.
Everything hurts. I mean, they will come in, they'll be like, the temperature in the room. It's like, guys, it's 75 degrees. It's literally the best possible climate I could give you. I'm dying. This blanket you've given me is made of just like chicken wire, and it's like that's like 1,000 threads silk. It's like everything hurts, and they just feel sick, and it's such a powerful thing. I had over 10 years ago, I have diverticulitis. For those who don't know, it's a stomach condition that has to do with poor fiber in your diet, and then you develop a little kind of pocket in your stomach, and it can get yucky, and it's very painful. It's way up there on the pain scale, both in Jim's I'm a pussy subjective scale, and also most people agree it's pretty damn hard. And so the first time that I had this, a real diverticulitis strike, I was walking to my car, And I felt, and I was sure, for 1 second, I was sure that somebody had snuck up behind me and jabbed a knife into the side of my body. I was 100% sure I had just been attacked. And I spun around, believing I was going to see somebody with a knife sticking out of my side. And I fall to the ground, and it was just the most pain I've ever been in my life. Thankfully, my father was there, and he grabbed me. He said, "Oh my God, are you dying? Like, what's going on?" I was like, "I don't know. Get me to a hospital. Get there, get the treatment." So here I am laying in bed, and I'll never forget, it was the first time in my life I had ever had an opioid. I don't believe I'd ever had one before this. This was my mid-20s. And they bring me a very heavy dose of Percocet. And they're like, "You need to take this." And I was like, "Well, why?" And they're like, "The amount of pain you're in, you need to take this." I'm like, "Okay, don't tell me twice." And I'll never forget when I felt that thing hit me. And I thought, "Oh, I get it now. Yeah, no, I get it. I get why everybody's addicted to these. I get why everybody wants these." I felt peace. I felt no pain. And then I also felt good. I remember feeling warm in my whole body. I remember feeling euphoric. And I went from an emotional, terrified, anguished person who was throbbing in pain, wondering if I was dying, to feeling like, you know, man, I could just like watch some Gilligan's Island right now and I'll be fine. Like, it's all going to work out. It is a profound medication. And it definitely, I think, Dr. Mike, you were saying earlier, it has medical value, but it has to be utilized in a really careful way, I think.
Yes, absolutely right. Because it is so powerful and it has such a strong effect on mitigating certain types of pain, we should highlight, it needs to be obviously prescribed and utilized appropriately because of the profound effects. And again, because of the addictive properties it has, why would somebody not want to experience that constantly, all day, every day? If it's such a wonderful feeling. But again, the negative effects that it can have can be quite drastic.
Very dangerous. I remember I took the pill bottle, I handed it to my wife, and I said, "Get rid of these. I'd rather have the pain because I know I'll never feel pain again. I'll just keep taking those and I'll have no idea what's going on with my body. I need my alarm system to some extent to tell me what's going on." So, Dr. Mike, as we get to the end here, you alluded throughout the show, you had advice as we went through the topic for people that do have chronic pain, for people that are experiencing that emotional defeat that comes with not knowing how to deal with this. And you definitely had advice throughout the show. And now that we've kind of also talked a little bit about what hyperalgesia is and the effect of opioids and just being delicate with these things, I wonder if you have any advice for the general audience, folks that are out there that are saying, you know, this was an important episode for me. I listened to this therapy podcast because I like mental health. Chronic pain and pain in general is part of mental health and emotional health and behavioral health as much as it's part of physiological health. And this episode may have touched a lot of people, or it might be an episode that people are sharing with their friends and family and saying, "Hey, you've told me about this problem. These guys are talking about what you've talked about, and they believe you, and also they had advice." And I wonder if you could kind of put us into a big picture context. What kind of advice would you give to folks out there that are experiencing that chronic pain kind of reality?
My first bit of advice would be, please try and seek help in regards to, one, talk to your physician to hopefully get a referral to a pain specialist. So there are people out there that do specialize, and they're physicians that do specialize in pain, and they'll be able to talk to you and help you and maybe identify if there is or isn't a cause and what type of pain that may be and what may be the best treatment. It may mean that you do speak to a psychologist to be able to help you and talk you through, because again, the emotional side of things is tightly tied to it. And the other thing that the pain specialist would be able to do for you is educate you on your pain. Empower you. If you understand what's happening to your own body, and as opposed to, like you were saying earlier, pain is a black box and we have no real idea what's going on. Am I crazy? Am I not? If you get somebody to say, listen, your pain is real, it's definitely real, and this is what we think might be happening, and to educate you will empower you. So get educated on pain, see a pain specialist. If you want to try any pharmacological interventions or whatever other intervention, please see a health professional before you do any of those things. there's a lot of people out there say, oh yeah, I've got pain and I did this and I tried this and I tried that. And I know it's very easy to listen to a friend and take their advice and just take some sort of supplement or whatever it may be. But truly, before you do those things, make sure you see your physician. A lot of these supplements can have, again, off-target effects. Maybe physiologically you shouldn't be taking a particular supplement or medication. So always see your physician prior.
I'm going to ask this question.
And get your pain treated.
I'm going to ask this question betting that you're going to have a reaction to it. And that is, are you saying that I shouldn't just take the pain pills that I see advertised on television?
See, Australia's very different.
I know.
You don't have the same types of ads that you guys... Last time I was in the States, I think I was in Vegas and I put the TV on and then there was an ad about, I don't know, incontinence or something, and they had all these happy old people dancing in a meadow, and they spoke about this drug, and then there was a 40-minute
all the side
spiel
effects
with this bloke talking. Yeah, might cause death, might cause palpitations, might cause... I'm just thinking, we don't have that in
And
Australia.
meanwhile, the
Really?
people in the
Hold
video
on,
were
wait a minute.
dancing and frolicking.
Yeah.
You don't have that in Australia?
You didn't know that?
No.
It's illegal in every other
virtually
country
no other
to advertise
country.
pharmaceuticals
Yeah.
directly to the public.
Really?
You can advertise them to physicians, and physicians
Yeah.
can make educated choices, but they do not have a reality where people come knocking on physicians' doors and going, I want Sudafedavin, because I saw a commercial.
You didn't know why I was asking that question, like it was some
No.
kind
Yeah.
of loaded question.
Only in
No.
America can pharmaceuticals directly advertise to the uninformed public,
mean-
and then subtly throw in there, by the way, this could
I'll tell
murder you.
Today, I was watching Hulu today, watching like a 30-minute program on Hulu, and during that 30-minute program, I saw 2 different pharmaceutical ads, one for an opiate and one for a schizophrenia medication.
Oh, wow.
I was like,
Wow.
who are you advertising to?
Well, and the new one now is
Yeah.
ADHD.
Yeah,
Oh,
yeah.
yeah,
So
that's a very
every
popular
time
one.
you go anywhere, it's like, hey, do you want some Adderall? Hey, do you want some Adderall? Hey, you probably
Yeah.
need some Adderall. Go talk to your doctor about Adderall. And that's always how the commercial.
If
Talk
you
to your
phrase it-
doctor
if you
about
phrase it that way, then you
death
probably do.
pills. Yeah. Talk to your doctor about Bananarama.
My favorite one I ever saw was for a fungus medication. It was for something, some type of fungus, and it was a pill. And one of the possible side effects, I will never forget this. One of the possible side effects was unbearable pain.
Wow.
It made me
Wow.
like I was in pain from laughing. I was like, that is the most ridiculous
Unbearable
advertisement I've ever
pain.
seen. And they're just rattling through,
Yeah.
as fast as they can,
Oh,
all
yeah.
of the possible side
Yes.
effects. For people who aren't in the United States, they rattle through them. They speak like this at the very end of the commercial, so you don't understand everything they're saying.
Unbearable pain and homicidal
Now, I thought it
ideation.
was an
Talk to your
SNL skit. I thought
Yes.
it was a skit. I thought I was watching like Key and Peele or SNL or something, and I'm like, this has got to be a joke because it's farcical. I did not think that anyone
nope.
would watch that and go,
They're
wow,
advertising drugs.
I might take that. So yeah, we don't get that. We also have a public healthcare system as well, but
Right.
that's again another topic of conversation. I think
I would
where
love to do a deep dive where we just play the game of is this real or not? And I just say things that exist in American
Spoiler, though,
healthcare,
they're all real.
and you and Matt have to guess whether that's a real thing.
Spoiler, they're all
I
real.
like that idea.
I would love that. I would love to send you guys clips of American pharmaceutical commercials and then just see if you guys can guess if they're all real or what's fake.
Oh wow!
Oh,
Imagine that.
It'd be fun. Well, Dr. Mike, we just loved having you on. I want to make sure that listeners can find you and Dr. Matt and all of your various projects. Take us through. Tell us where folks can find more information about what you guys do and get alongside your projects. And if they liked listening to you today, how they can follow along and be a part of what you do.
So if you want to watch me talk at a whiteboard talking about how the body works, well, you can go to my YouTube channel, which is just Dr. Matt and Dr. Mike. You can listen to our podcast, again, Dr. Matt and Dr. Mike's Medical Podcast. I'm on basically every social media platform, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, and my handle is at Dr. Mike Todorovic, which is at DrMikeTodorovic. And yeah, follow, say hi, send me a message, and it'll be great.
Yep, and everybody who's listening to our show today, go into this episode's description wherever you're listening to podcasts, and we will link to all of that. So we'll make sure to link to every single thing he just mentioned, every single handle, and you guys can follow him everywhere and be a part of it great medical information, a really, really interesting way to download really good information. You learn a lot. You
do.
It's a terrifying amount of information, I'll be honest. There's definitely more than a few topics that I have looked at and been like, nope, not ready to talk about it. I'm like one like, oh, high cholesterol, Jim. And I'm like, fuck you, Mike. I don't want to watch this.
Well, I'm not going to lie. There's been episodes where I've had to stop listening while driving because I just was no longer paying attention to the road.
Oh, yeah. You're sitting there visualizing all these.
All right, this is not safe.
Yeah.
I'll listen to this later.
Yeah, we need to put disclaimers at the end of all of his podcasts too. Dr. Mike is not to be enjoyed behind vehicular homicide. Be careful, may cause unbearable pain and cringing. Well, loved having you today, man. So excited for you to be a part of this. Thank you so much. And thanks to all of you
Boys,
who have been listening and supporting healthcare podcasts like Dr. Matt and Dr. Mike, like Pod Therapy. There's not enough out there doing the job. So grateful to always know colleagues and looking forward to an all-expense paid trip to Australia to come visit and record a podcast with you. That'll be fun.
Deal. We love our brother/sister podcast. So, we're going to have to bring you guys on to our podcast very soon.
We would love, and we prefer to be referred to as your mistress podcast, please.
Oh, I like that. No, that's good. That's good.
It makes it sexy. Well, we're at the end of our show.
Not when you say it that way, it doesn't.
If you'd like to check out extra content with Dr. Mike, we had him on our Patreon as well. Patreon content goes to everybody who supports us at any amount at patreon.com/therapy. I want to take a second to thank, of course, our bosses, the Saccharin 16, the mysterious and shrouded Illuminati members of the fan club, the Theraproducers. Thank you, Smitty Scoop, Jake Schneider, Robert Brownie Jr. Mint, Kayla Lansbury, Judy Schneider, Nathan's Hot Dog Scoop, King of Student Loan Debt, Dr. Ben Don, Crazy Manana Scoop, Mason Miller, Carolyn Albert, Leon Kisab, Kevin Chamberlain, Malia, Richard Macy, Cindy Ash, Newstick, Lord Colin Stewart, Dirty B, Ben Stanley, Sammy Scoop, and Sarah Smith.
And if you'd like to hear this episode uncut and unedited,
may cause unbearable pain,
and enjoy our spontaneous life projects, go to patreon.com/therapy. And thank you for supporting mental health.
We got to do that. That's all the time we got for this week's session. We want to thank our landlords, Matt Mattingly's Ice Cream Social Podcast, and our special guest, Dr. Mike Todorovic. Yeah, whatever. And thanks for all of you who support the show. Remember, pod therapy isn't something you should keep all to yourself. Share this episode with someone who needs it. Open the episode subscription in your podcast app and copy and paste that link we provided into your social media. Don't forget, you can find us at facebook.com/podtherapy, on Twitter at PodTherapyGuys, on Instagram at PodTherapyGuys, and at patreon.com/therapy.
If you want to submit a question to the show, ask anonymously at podtherapy.net or email us at podtherapyguys@gmail.com. I'm Nick Tangeman.
The Lord of Pain, Jim Jobin.
Thanks, and we'll see you for your appointment next week.
Mike's sadism has motivated clinical research.
Tell Dr. Matt we said hi.
Oh, there you go.
So that was Dr. Mike.
They may
That
have
was
missed
awesome.
the part where
Here's the thing.
you talk about giant spiders.
I really enjoyed that episode, and I kind of forgot that I was hosting the show.
Yeah, I noticed when you didn't keep time, goddammit.